The incense burned sweet in the air, but to Ixchel it smelled like smoke from a funeral pyre. Her wedding veil, made of hand-woven jade beads and white feathers, dragged heavily across the stone floor as she walked toward the altar, each step feeling like a betrayal. The chants of the priests echoed through the temple walls of the Maya city of Ixchel, and the people cheered not for her, but for the alliance her marriage would secure. Her groom, Tak, was not a man of gentle hands. A warrior with blood still under his fingernails, his smile held no warmth when he took her hand. She had begged her father, begged him not to trade her to Tak in exchange for protection. But the city was on the brink of war, and her tears meant little in the face of politics. The moment the vows were spoken, she ceased being a daughter. She became property. The bruises started that very night. By the third day, Ixchel had learned silence was safer than resistance. By the seventh, she stopped looking anyone in the eye. But when she dared to speak against him after he struck a servant girl, he dragged her through the temple courts, spat at her feet, and declared her cursed. The priests turned away. Her own father looked down. Before sunset, they cast her out. Barefoot, bloodied, and draped in a shredded bridal robe, she wandered into the forest, where every rustling branch sounded like a predator. No food, no shelter, no name that mattered. She collapsed by the river's edge, skin burning from the sun, heart colder than the water beside her. And that's when she heard footsteps low, heavy, and unfamiliar. Not Maya, not a soldier. Someone else. The footsteps stopped just a few paces from where she lay, her body too weak to flee, too broken to care. Ixchel opened her eyes slowly, blinking against the sun. A shadow loomed over her, tall, broad-shouldered, and unfamiliar. The man was not Maya. His skin was lighter, sun-darkened but foreign, and his clothes were simple, rough-spun, soaked at the edges as if he had just come from the water. In his hand was a long wooden spear, not adorned or ceremonial, but practical. He crouched beside her, his brow furrowed, eyes scanning her wounds. She flinched when he reached for her, expecting more pain. But his touch was gentle. He said something she couldn't understand. The language was soft, rounded, nothing like the clipped speech of her people. Still, there was no threat in his tone. He pulled a leather flask from his hip and offered it to her. Water. Clean, cool, and real. She drank slowly, unsure if it was mercy or a trick. When he gestured toward the trees, she hesitated. But where else could she go? She followed, limping, leaning on him more than she wanted to. They walked along a narrow trail, the jungle pressing close on either side. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was survival. After some distance, they reached a small hut near the riverbank, made of driftwood and thatch. A dugout canoe sat beside it, half covered with woven nets. Inside the hut, it was dark and smelled of salt and smoke. The man helped her sit, then set to boiling herbs over a small fire. She watched him, this quiet foreigner who had found her when the world turned away. He said nothing more. Neither did she. But in that silence, something began to shift, something that felt almost like safety. Ixchel awoke to the sound of waves lapping against the riverbank, the scent of burning wood clinging to her skin. The hut was dimly lit, the fire reduced to embers. Her body ached in places she hadn't known could ache, her lips split, ribs bruised, and a long gash on her thigh now wrapped in a linen bandage. She didn't remember him doing that. The stranger was outside. She could hear his movements, gentle splashes, the scrape of a knife against wood. She rose slowly, ignoring the sting in her limbs, and stepped outside. The sun glared off the water, turning the river into a ribbon of white light. He stood knee-deep in it, gutting fish with practiced movements, his sleeves rolled up, his expression unreadable. When he noticed her, he gave a small nod, then returned to his work. No questions, no commands, just a quiet acceptance of her presence. That unsettled her more than cruelty would have. She sat on a stone nearby, wrapping the rough cloak he had left for her tighter around her shoulders. The silence stretched between them like the river wide, deep and unspoken. Her fingers brushed the edge of her bandage. He had touched her wounds with care. No man had done that before without leaving new ones. The thought brought a sudden wave of emotion, grief, anger, shame. It burned in her chest. She spoke his name, or tried to, but she didn't know it. You, she said instead. He looked up. Kai, he replied, placing a hand on his chest. She understood. Kai, a foreign name, like a tide from another shore. She gave no name in return. Not yet, not while her past clung to her like bloodstains. But in the hush of that morning, as gulls cried overhead, something inside her began to breathe again. That night, the dreams returned vivid, cruel, and suffocating. Ixchel saw the temple steps, the red smear of her blood on white stone, her father's eyes turning away. She woke with a gasp, her throat raw from a scream she hadn't realized had escaped. The hut was dark, the coals in the fire pit still glowing faintly. Kai was seated near the doorway, his back straight, a carved wooden figure resting in his palm. He glanced at her but didn't speak. She wiped her face with trembling fingers, tasting salt tears. It embarrassed her, but he looked away, offering her the gift of dignity. Later, as dawn painted gold across the treetops, he took her downriver in his canoe. The water was calm, birds lifting into the air like prayers. She sat silently, arms wrapped around her knees, the wind tugging at her unkempt hair. She still wore the tattered remnants of her wedding robes, their once pure white stained with memory. Kai didn't ask why. He only stopped where mangroves tangled the shoreline and pointed at the reeds. Fish traps. With quiet efficiency, he pulled one in, showing her the catch silver-scaled and wriggling. Then he handed her another, gesturing for her to try. She hesitated, then obeyed. Her fingers fumbled, but he corrected her gently. No words, just guiding hands. For the first time, she did something that wasn't about survival. It was simple, mundane, but it felt like something stolen back from a life she no longer believed in. That evening, she helped prepare the fish, watching Kai smoke it over the fire, his hands steady, precise. He lived simply: fish, fire, quiet, no demands, no gods watching from high stone altars. As she chewed the first real food in days, Ixchel realized she hadn't thought about death all afternoon. That frightened her, but it also meant something was changing. The days passed without measure, marked only by the rhythm of the river and the crackle of firewood. Ixchel still didn't speak much, but her silence no longer felt like fear. It had become a kind of peace. Kai never pressed her. He rose with the sun, worked with the tides, and returned before dusk with fish, herbs, or sometimes nothing but damp clothes and a tired smile. She began to mirror him, mending nets, fetching water, grinding herbs. He showed her with gestures and patience. Her body healed faster than her heart, but the bruises faded, and her walk grew steadier. One morning, as she crouched near the fire preparing palm hearts, she heard him behind her, carving wood as always. He was making small animals, now birds, turtles, a jaguar. She watched him for a while. Then, without warning, she said it. Ixchel. Her voice cracked from disuse, but it carried. He looked up. Ixchel, he repeated carefully, like it was a gift she'd handed him. And maybe it was. The name had once felt like a curse, shouted by a man who beat her and spat her worth into dust. But here, spoken by him, it sounded different, softer, as if he believed it still meant something. That evening, he handed her one of the carvings, a jaguar, fierce and poised. Ixchel, he said again, placing it gently in her hands. She didn't know if he understood the weight of that gesture, but she did. It was the first thing she had been given in a long time that wasn't food, orders, or pain. That night, she held the carving as she slept. The jungle outside murmured its usual sounds: owls, frogs, wind in the trees, but inside the hut there was quiet. And for the first time since her exile, she did not dream of blood. The morning was still when the trouble arrived. Birds scattered in a sudden burst, and the river, once calm, seemed to stiffen beneath the wind. Ixchel was rinsing clothes near the bank when she heard the sound boots on earth, too many. Her breath caught. She rose slowly, her fingers dripping, heart thudding against her ribs. Through the trees, she saw them. 4 Maya soldiers in jaguar skin cloaks, spears in hand, faces painted for war. They moved with purpose, scanning the brush, eyes sharp. Her legs moved before her mind caught up. She ran, barefoot and breathless, toward the hut. Kai was already outside, sensing what she had seen. His eyes locked on hers, and in a single motion, he grabbed his bow, notched an arrow, and stood between her and the path. The soldiers appeared moments later. They froze at the sight of him, this foreign man, defiant and armed. One stepped forward, speaking fast in Maya. Kai didn't answer. He didn't understand. But Ixchel did. "She is a traitor," the soldier spat. "She shamed her husband and fled. We are here to take her back." Her knees weakened. The jungle tilted. She opened her mouth to scream, to plead, but Kai moved first. His voice was calm, even as he raised his bow slightly. He said something in his own tongue, something Ixchel didn't know, but his meaning was clear. "She is not yours." The tension crackled like firewood. The lead soldier sneered. "You will die for a cursed woman?" Kai didn't flinch. The soldiers didn't attack. Not then. Not yet. But their eyes promised they'd return. As they retreated, Ixchel fell to the ground, hands trembling. Kai kneeled beside her, his hand brushing hers, not to ask if she was all right but to promise, without words, that if they came again, he would still be there. That night, the hut felt smaller. The air was heavy with the threat of return, the soldiers' voices still echoing in Ixchel's mind. She sat near the fire, her knees drawn to her chest, eyes fixed on the flames. Outside, the jungle whispered its usual songs, but they no longer soothed her. Kai moved around the hut in his quiet rhythm, checking weapons, reinforcing the door with wooden slats, coiling ropes near the window. He did not speak, but every movement spoke for him. He was preparing for war. Ixchel couldn't understand why. She was nothing to him, just a girl who had stumbled into his life with nothing but bruises and silence. And yet, here he was, ready to defend her against her own people. When he finally sat beside her, the fire cast a soft glow on his face. He held out a bowl, boiled herbs and smoked fish. She took it with trembling fingers. "Why?" she asked, her voice raw. He looked at her, eyes dark and steady. "No one helped my sister," he said simply. The words hit like a stone dropped in still water. He looked away, into the flames. They came, took her. No one stopped them. His voice broke, just slightly. "I won't let that happen again." Ixchel didn't reply. She couldn't. But slowly, she placed the bowl aside and reached for his hand. Her fingers wrapped around his, and for a long moment they said nothing. No vows, no explanations, just warmth, his calloused hand against her healing skin. Outside, the wind howled. But inside, beneath the thatched roof and flickering fire, they sat close. Two broken people with no past to return to, only the quiet firelight and a fragile thread of something new, something that might one day become trust, or maybe even love. The soldiers came again just before dawn. No warning this time, just the snap of branches, the dull thud of boots in wet earth, and the sharp bark of commands shouted into the morning mist. Ixchel jolted awake, Kai already crouched by the door, bow in hand, a blade strapped to his thigh. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. She nodded, understanding. No running. Not this time. They had prepared. The hut was no fortress, but it had walls, and Kai had laid traps in the trees, sharpened stakes hidden beneath the leaves. Ixchel helped barricade the door, her hands steady despite the panic clenching her gut. Her eyes met Kai's. If they were taken, they would not go quietly. The first soldier fell into the snare. His scream split the stillness. Another rushed the door, and Kai's arrow met him mid-charge. The third flanked the back, only to meet the blade Kai had buried in the earth 2 nights before. But the fourth, the one who had spoken of shame, of traitors, burst through the side wall, fury in his painted face. He lunged at Ixchel. She didn't scream. Instead, she grabbed the heavy pot from the fire and swung. It cracked against his skull with a sickening thud. He collapsed beside her feet. She stood frozen, chest heaving, smoke rising around her. Then Kai's hand found hers. His touch didn't feel like rescue, it felt like recognition. They stared at the wreckage, blood and ash scattered on the floor. It was over. For now. Ixchel didn't weep. She didn't collapse. She just breathed. For the first time in moons, she breathed without shame, tightening her lungs. In the silence that followed, broken only by the hiss of dying embers, she looked at Kai and saw not a stranger, but something far more dangerous a future. The river flowed slower in the days that followed, or perhaps it only felt that way. The soldiers were gone. Whether dead or retreating into the jungle to lick their wounds, Ixchel didn't know, and she didn't care. For once, she wasn't waiting for danger. The hut remained, battered but standing, and Kai worked to rebuild the broken wall with quiet precision. She helped him, her hands blistered but willing. Each movement, each breath, felt like reclaiming something lost. She no longer flinched at every sound, no longer checked her reflection for bruises. At night, she sat beside Kai under the stars, her head resting against his shoulder, the carved jaguar still in her lap. He had made another this one, a turtle, slow and steady. He handed it to her without a word. She understood. "What will you do now?" she asked one evening, as fireflies blinked through the trees. Kai stared into the dark water. "I was always drifting. Until you." His answer wasn't poetic. It was honest. That honesty had become their language. No promises, just presence. She nodded. She didn't want to return to Ixchel. Even if the gates opened for her, she no longer belonged to that world of stone temples and silent priests. She belonged to the river now, to this patch of earth and salt and smoke. With him. One morning, she rose early and washed the last remains of her wedding robe in the river. The blood was gone. The shame washed away. She buried it beneath the roots of a ceiba tree, the tree of life, as Maya had always believed. And when she stood again, she wasn't a bride, wasn't a cast-off. She was Ixchel, reborn not by ritual, but by survival, by fire, by water, and by the hand that had never asked for hers, only offered it. The seasons shifted, the rains gentler, the mornings warmer. Time softened the sharp edges of memory, though it did not erase them. Ixchel still dreamed sometimes of stone temples, of hands that hurt, of eyes that judged. But now, when she woke, there was sunlight on her skin, the scent of fish roasting over the fire, and Kai's quiet movements nearby. He never asked her to forget. He only stayed. Together, they built a new shelter, stronger than the hut before. It stood closer to the river's bend, shaded by wide trees and reinforced with driftwood and palm. They carved it with symbols from both their world-sure sun patterns, his ocean lines, a home made not of heritage, but healing. Eli, a fisherman from a village 3 days downriver, visited often now. Kai traded fish and herbs with him. The three would laugh in broken language, gestures filling in what words could not. Ixchel learned to weave again, not for temples or weddings, but for herself. Baskets, mats, even a small hammock for the turtle carving she now made. At night, she would place one near the fire and whisper old songs she once sang as a child before the world taught her silence. Kai listened. He always listened. One evening, as the sun vanished behind the trees, she took his hand, not in fear, not in thanks, but in choice. Her voice was steady when she spoke. "This is my home now." He nodded. No grand reply, just the gentle squeeze of fingers that had held her through the darkest nights. In a world that had once tried to bury her, she had found something unexpected, not rescue, not revenge, but a place to grow. And in that quiet bend of the river, where the jungle whispered stories of gods and storms, she planted her own. The river still flowed, just as it always had, but Ixchel no longer saw it as a boundary. It was a beginning. Seasons had passed since the day she collapsed on its edge, bruised, discarded, nameless. Now she stood tall, weaving beside the hut with steady hands, her hair braided with shells Kai had brought from the coast. Her eyes no longer darted in fear. Her steps no longer faltered. She was not healed completely. Some wounds linger beneath the skin, but she was living, truly living. Kai carved in the shade, his quiet presence as constant as the sun. They didn't speak of the past. They didn't need to. Their silence had evolved into something sacred. On the edge of the jungle, life had taken root where only pain had existed before. Ixchel had not just survived her exile, she had outgrown it. Her strength had not come from vengeance, but from the small choices she made every day, to stay, to trust, to rebuild. One evening, as firelight danced in the open air and the night hummed with peace, Kai looked at her and said, "You are not who they left behind." She smiled, fingers brushing the carved jaguar still resting near the hearth. "No," she answered, "I never was. And neither are you." You. Watching this story, what did it make you feel? Did Ixchel's journey remind you of your own battles? Have you ever been saved not by grand gestures, but by small acts of kindness? Tell us in the comments. What moment in this story stayed with you the most? Would you trust again if you were in her place? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Your voice matters here just like Ixchel's did. And if her story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that echo through time.